Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Dr. Peter Jennings. He is Associate Professor of Leadership Studies at Hillsdale College. Dr. Jennings, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here, Scott.
Why are we talking about leadership in athletics at this classical education conference this week? What do leadership and athletics have to do with classical education?
Good question. I think they have everything to do with classical education, but not everybody understands that, so that's why we're having this topic. To put it simply, the ultimate end of classical education is to prepare people for citizenship, but ultimately leadership in the polis or the community. So just simply put, leadership is the ultimate end of a classical education. Athletics are central to classical education from the beginning. Classical education had its start in gymnasium. And it's not a gymnasium like we think of a gymnasium where people play basketball. Gymnasiums back in Plato's day were more like parks where you could do athletic activities, and people did do athletic activities. And that's where Socrates went, and that was his haunt where he hung out, and that's where Plato started his academy, and that's where Aristotle has his. So athletics is central, the central physical location, but it's the central location not just physically, but there's something about the agon, the competitiveness, what was going on athletically in the garden, in the gymnasium, that was also central to the agon, the competitiveness, the struggle for intellectual, moral, spiritual growth that is classical education, all in service of preparing people to be worthy of the responsibilities of leadership in the polis, in the community. So that's where the two come together, I think.
So that's a little long ago. How has that evolved to become something today that we talk about tennis or baseball, football, where athletics and classical education still have that place where they meet?
Yeah, well, that's good, because I think they don't meet in general. I don't think that athletics and classical education or education in general meet the way they should. I think we're speaking in general terms, we too often think in terms, I use the term academics and athletics. So classical education is about academics. It's about books. It's about reading. It's about developing the mind, disciplining the mind to think well, and furnishing the mind with cultural values, Western heritage. So we think of that as academics, and we think of athletics as not for the mind, but strictly for the body. And at best, we think of that as a distraction, or even worse, a threat to real academic purposes of education. I think that's a problem. There's a dualism there that I think is false, that wasn't there in the beginning, a dualism that separates mind and body and associates academics with mind and athletics with body. I think that's a false distinction. I think that's an unproductive distinction. And I think if true classical education, going back to its roots, is a whole person education We are embodied souls, not just souls or minds. We are embodied, and you cannot separate, in terms of cultivating, developing the person, you cannot separate the body and the mind. Athletics is education in the same sense that academics, books and reading is education. They serve the same purposes, or they should. So I think the point is one, your first question, recognize that leadership and athletics are central to classical education from the beginning. And then two, to get us to think critically, to examine ourselves carefully about, do we have the right relationship today between academics and athletics? Are they properly synthesized in service of cultivating bodies, minds, spirits, in service of ultimately producing citizens and leaders?
When you talk about leadership in athletics, do you mean coaches are leaders in athletics, or do you mean how students, how young adults can become better leaders through athletics?
Well, both as professors or coaches or administrators or running your radio program with the team that you have here. We're all in a position of leadership where we coach and we teach and we counsel and mentor and help develop people. So that's an important part. But what I'm emphasizing is the student side of that. We're helping students grow and become fully mature, developed human beings who are capable of and worthy of the responsibilities of leadership.
How does that transpire in the context of a team, where you have, if you're on the football team here at Hillsdale, perhaps 100 other students, the tennis team, 15, whatever that number might be, where some of those student athletes are going to become the leader, the captain, perhaps, of a squad, and others might learn along the way. How does that happen?
That's a good question. Sometimes it's a very messy process, and that's representative of real life. That human affairs, the moral and practical complexities and many messiness of human affairs, and when you're talking about this idea of leadership, just strip it down to a basic level. This idea of leadership is a universal human phenomenon. Anytime human beings have to work together to accomplish something that they can't do by themselves, this phenomenon that we call leadership is likely to emerge. How that emerges can differ and can be messy, but it will emerge. And here's the other thing that's significant. The quality of the leadership available is often decisive to the success or failure of the endeavor. So in team sports, which competitive team sports, like you're mentioning football and things like that, the quality of the leadership available to the team is often a decisive factor on whether the team is ultimately successful or not. So my point about leadership in athletics is that leadership should be an explicit part of the educational program. You're not just teaching, you were talking about football here, it could be any sport. We're not just teaching kids how to play the sport. And a lot of times, part of the problem is a lot of times the athletics does reduce to just focusing technically on the skills to allow a student, an athlete, to excel technically in their sport. But the moral dimensions of being an athlete, which I include the leadership part of it if you're on a team sport, are also should be explicit objects of the educational focus of the coach. And that's the part that's important. And how a coach counsels and coaches and mentors and develops and teaches and trains students to take on leadership responsibilities is fundamentally an important. Actually, that's more important than the sport itself. The sport itself has real no educational value, right? Speaking from an educational institution, the sport itself has no value educationally. The fact that you can shoot a ball into a hoop or, push another 300 guy back and get the football over the line, there's no educational value in that. The educational value in the athletics comes in the virtues that are learned in playing the sport, practicing the sport, the courage, the self-control, the discipline, the justice, respect for teammates, fair play, all those virtues. And then when those virtues are applied to the problem of leadership, now you're getting real educational value, really important educational value that transcends the sport, that can carry over into that player's family life when they try and provide leadership as a mother or a father, or their work life as a manager, like you're a manager, or as a professor or a coach, or whatever they do, those lessons that they learn in the sport. Ultimately, what's important is not that I learned how to shoot a basketball through a hoop. What's important is I grew as a man in virtue, in the pursuit of excellence, and I learned how to take responsibility and lead others. Right?
Why do we talk about leaders on teams, or in our circumstance, student leaders on teams? What do the teammates get from a student being in a leadership position, or a teammate being in a leadership position, that they don't get from a coach, for example?
Well, that's a good question. And you get into a lot of social and psychological dynamics. Here's a silly example just to highlight what I'm thinking about here. But if you're in a family with many siblings and you're all in a room together and mom and dad are there, the dynamics of the group are very different than when it's just the siblings and mom and dad aren't there. And it's that way on teams too. And if, in coaching circles, we talk about good teams, better teams tend to have strong player leadership, right? Because the coach, the mom and dad, isn't there all the time, and they're hierarchically, they're at a different level. But when you see strong leadership, strong and good leadership emerge from within the players themselves and are providing good, useful, helpful leadership within the team, you tend to see a team that's much better in all facets, including their win-loss record.
Talking to Dr. Peter Jennings, Associate Professor of Leadership Studies here at Hillsdale College, about leadership in athletics. We hear that sports builds character and athletics builds character. Do they? And what is it about that environment that perhaps can forge a leader that is not available elsewhere?
Yeah, good question. Do sports build character? Well, it's cliche they do, but there's a lot of research that says they don't. And it's both. They do and they don't. But the point is, it's not automatic. There's nothing intrinsic about sports that makes it an automatic character building factory. It doesn't work like that. In fact, sports, if building character, if pursuing excellence, virtue is not intentional in part of the way the coach coaches, it's very possible that sports could be derogatory or negative, destructive to character. And we see that all the time in big time athletics where people cheat and steroids and drugs and do all kinds of things to win. And that's not good for developing human beings, morally, mentally, spiritually. But I think, so I say this, so I'm a professor. My classroom is a standard classroom up in the buildings, and students sit in chairs and they sit passively while we have discussions. And it's fine. But for what I'm teaching, leadership and virtue, it's not a good classroom. Leadership and the virtue that enables leadership, which is really what I'm trying to teach, help people grow in virtue, those are experiential educational phenomena. To really learn virtue and leadership, you got to practice it. You got to have the experience. You can sit passively and read these, quote, great books. But the ability of just passively reading about somebody else's experience, the ability to have a real formative effect on you for you to grow mentally, morally, spiritually is limited. But when these students go out on a gridiron or the basketball court or the pool or the track or the diamond, they have real experiences of victory and defeat, of humiliation, embarrassment, success, challenge, adversity. Those are real firsthand experiences. And it's those real firsthand experiences that students need in order to really learn and cultivate and grow in virtue. I say that the coaches on our campus have the best classrooms on campus for teaching what this college is trying to teach. And I would love to be a coach, because coaches really, another problem I think with leadership in athletics is, there's a separation between academics and athletics. And I think mindset-wise, too many of my professor colleagues think in terms of in that same mindset of I'm a professor, I teach, and then there's the coaches who are literally down the hill who do their thing, but that's not academics. At best, that's a distraction because they pull my students out of class for their travel, for their games. On the flip side, too many coaches think that all I do is coach my team, and I'm not a teacher in the moral, spiritual realm where the professors are. I think those are both false dualisms. Frankly, some of our coaches are some of the best professors we have on campus. And some of the professors are great coaches in terms of their interest and commitment to athletics. But I think what we need is more a synthesis and recognize that whether you're a professor or coach, we're all teachers here, and we all have the same educational mission, which is to help our young men and women become better men and women and grow in virtue.
Let's be explicit about that, meaning these leadership lessons that you can learn through athletics, how do they help students in the classroom, and how might they help students later in life?
Excellent. That's an excellent question. For me, it's obvious. And I don't mean that to be dismissive of the question. I think it's a great question, but I don't think it's something that we emphasize enough. These varsity athletes, all of them, it's a heck of a lot of work these kids put in. They're putting in 20 plus hours a week. They're in the gym at 06 in the morning working out. They got practice, they got film study, they got injuries, they got therapy, they got all kinds of stuff. It takes a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of suffering and sacrifice. They learn self-control. They learn discipline. They learn perseverance. They learn work ethic. They learn all these really important virtues that are essential for us to become mature men and women capable of handling the responsibilities of family and marriage and all that kind of stuff. Those lessons that they learn, the virtues they develop in order to excel athletically, are the exact same virtues they need to excel academically. And they're the exact same virtues they need to excel as a husband or a father or a coach or whatever their career aspiration is. So the lessons they learn, the habits they develop, the crucibles they have to learn how to overcome, translate directly, in my view, into academics and every other aspect of their lives. And it's only for us as professors and coaches to make those lessons explicit and clear so the students so it's not lost on the students. Right?
I want to close with this because this is a real hot question these days. You look at college sports, they are big business, especially in the money sports, football and basketball. And there is more talk about money and transfer portals, and someone's getting $2 million in money to move from this school to that school. And heck, we even heard this past week about conferences looking for corporate sponsors to name the conference. This is what we talk about in college athletics. Yeah. So do sports still belong at the college level? You even said earlier that you got to be careful. There's the temptation to cheat. There's temptation for perhaps, performance enhancing drugs to get better, to be successful. So are sports still an essential and important part of the college experience?
No, not at that level. Here at our college or Division II, I say yes. But the big time sports that you're talking about, college level sports, that's business, that's commerce, and that is not only distraction, that is destructive to the real educational mission. It's a complex picture, and I think big time college athletics is exploitive of these athletes, and I think making it professional, which is essentially what they're doing, is fine. My point is, decouple it from the university.
Separate it.
Separate it, because it at that level, when it's pure business and it is about winning, it's all about winning. That's fine. Let it be its own commercial enterprise and win to its heart's content. But it's not. But if that's what it is all about, it's about victory. It's not about virtue. And once it ceases to be about virtue, then it has no educational value, and it does not belong on a university campus, period. And I think it's a shame because, as you just said, I think athletics are really important to higher education. And I really hope that what's happening at the big time level it does not infiltrate, and it already has a little bit, but I think it's really important for us as administrators, as professors, coaches, to protect the integrity of our athletics, so that even though the value of athletics comes through a commitment to victory, because that's what makes it competitive athletics and not just for fun recreation.
Mm-hmm.
For fun recreation has value too, but that's just leisure and fun. For competitive athletics to really be about virtue, you need a commitment to victory. That's important. But ultimately, the commitment needs to be about virtue. And that needs to be foremost. So we need to protect it here so that athletics serves the cause of virtue of higher education, that has educational value, and we keep the commercial stuff and the win-at-all-cost stuff out of it.
Dr. Peter Jennings is Associate Professor of Leadership Studies here at Hillsdale College as we talk about leadership in athletics. Dr. Jennings, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.